couple weeks ago, I broke down the Texas voucher program, the impact it's going to have on students, K-12 students in Texas, not just this year, but really what's going to happen next year as they begin to roll out the new Texas voucher program. I got a lot of questions. I got a lot of comments. And so because people seem interested, I'm now going to break down where Florida stands. Now, I think that these two states are pretty interesting, even if you're not in Texas and Florida, because you think of like their bellwether states, right? Like the canary in the coal mine type situation where what these states do, other states will follow. And that's kind of an historic norm. I'm not talking about like just people always follow Texas and Florida, but anytime states do pretty innovative stuff, all the other states start to look. And it's kind of like how public education started in the United States. Horace Mann, like in the 1830s, went to Prussia, and so did people all around the world. They went to Prussia because Prussia was doing something innovative with public education, and they brought it back to all their countries. They brought it to Canada, they brought it to the United States of America, et cetera, et cetera. So people are going to be watching Texas and Florida to see what they want to do in their state. So this is kind of a like, get ready if you're not in one of these states, right? Because Texas is the new giant entering the voucher I don't want to say fight, but they are one of the biggest states entering this school choice movement, and I'm going to call it experimentation. I don't want to call it a fight, but the voucher experiment I think is a lot more correct because these are experiments. Make no doubt about it. They're all experiments, man. We are all trying to do better. We're all trying to learn, but let's don't act like these things are locked in and we automatically know that they're going to really take care of all the children all the right way. They're experiments. So I think we just kind of keep that level set as we go, okay? But Florida is one of the clearest examples of what happens after a state goes much further and actually starts living inside the system, right? So Florida's further along in this. Florida's not at the beginning of the school choice movement. It's one of the most mature models, I would say, in the United States. It did not become a voucher state overnight. It built these systems in layers. The Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program was created all the way back in 2001, right, to expand education opportunities for children from families with limited financial resources. Now, keep in mind, it was for families with limited financial resources. So it was capped. If you make a lot of money, you can't participate in this. But over time, Florida added more scholarship pathways, including programs aimed at students with disabilities, which is really cool. We got to take care of all the children. And then came the major turning point that began in 23-24 school year. Florida removed the main income restrictions and the enrollment cap for the Family Empowerment Scholarship for Educational Options. That's a mouthful, right? And opening that program broadly to students eligible to enroll in public schools across the board. So in law, we call this a slippery slope. All right. So if your state is like, well, look, we're just going to do a very limited voucher, limited scholarship, it's not going to end there because once those floodgates start to open up, you just kind of slide down the slope and these things grow and grow and grow. Now, that can be good for you. It can be bad for you. You may not care, but they typically grow. And that's called like the slippery slope argument, right? So the movement in Florida stopped being a state with school choice programs and became one of the clearest examples of a state restructuring education around large-scale, publicly funded alternatives. Lots of money. It's no longer small, right? So I'm going to get into the claims and the reality of how I see the situation, but a little bit of background. The Florida Senate staff analysis says the participation in this Family Empowerment Scholarship Program grew from 155,000 students in 2022-2023, so 155,000 students, to 24-25 to 362,000, more than double, right? That is one of the strongest official markers of just how large the system has become and kind of where it's going, right? I mean, if it doubles in 2 years and it just kind of keeps doubling, you can kind of see the long-term impact of that. And the money is not like symbolic because in 25-26, the school year we're in now, the standard private scholarship amounts generally to fall roughly $7,500 to $10,000, depending on the county and the grade level. So $7,500 to $10,000 are what families going to get in this scholarship fund. So like as an example, the published award sheet showed that, I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get it right. That the published award sheet showed that $8,300 for kids K-3 in Orange County, $7,717 for grades 4 through 8, and $7,500 for children 9 through 12. And great. Okay. So in some counties, the amounts are higher, and students in the unique abilities branch can receive much more, with higher need categories reaching into the 20s and 30s, depending on disability level in the district, right? So they have kind of a unique graph. It's not like a one size fits all. I guess that shows a level of some thinking, like they're trying to make the experiment right, and they're not just doing a one size fits all. I think that makes sense to me. So Florida, it's not just experimenting. It's now, I mean, it still is experimenting, but what they're going to say to you is it's really progressed beyond experimentation now. But I don't necessarily think that's true. But Florida is operating large publicly financed education marketplace, and that's why Florida matters. Because Florida shows the country that what happens when school choice stops being a side program and becomes part of the structure of education itself, right? So they really are leaping past the experimentation, at least the testing phase, but we still don't know if it's going to work. And I gave a speech last week in Florida, and I was like, I heard somebody say, and I've said this before, where well, public schools have had their chance, doggone it. Like they just couldn't get it done. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. We've been spending 2,000 years to try to get public education, right? Free public education for all. Literally over 2,000 years, man. Like the Greeks tested it for some, and it became more and more and more over time. And really, we didn't have free public school without segregation until like the 70s in the United States. The 1970s. I was alive then, man. And so this experiment went 70s and 80s, and we already started uncorking it to try a new experiment, right? So I don't know if we really got, if we really were trying to make it better instead of we want perfect. And we got to be real careful with perfect, because perfect doesn't exist. And we're letting perfect be the enemy of better, right? Because we should be trying to improve our current model, because we're just getting started with it, really. I know it feels like a long time, but it's not really that long a time. Okay. So let's get into what Florida built. And I'm going to try not to go off on a gazillion tangents today for you. All right. So here was one of the claims. Florida gives families more control over their child's education. Well, the reality is that's true in one sense. And Florida's Family Empowerment Scholarship is broadly available to K-12 students who are Florida residents, are eligible to enroll in their local public schools. But Florida also has this Family Empowerment Scholarship for students with unique abilities, which functions more like a broad education savings account for eligible students with disabilities. And it can be used for a much wider range of services and educational cost. Okay. Sometimes I get worried about doing these podcasts because some of this stuff, I mean, if you're a nerd like me, you're going to want to understand how this impacts you. And I promise I'm really going to get to it. Okay. But I got to keep giving the background because I want to make sure I'm not going off, too far and, giving you misinformation. Right. But this claim that Florida gives families more control over their child's education, but this is not just about giving parent options. Florida has built a parallel publicly funded education track outside the traditional district system, right? So it seems like you've got two tracks now, two different education systems in Florida, all being paid by, taxpayers. Maybe that's all right. Maybe you have two models to see which one works if they're, level and they can compete fairly, which they don't. I'll get to that. But once a state does this at scale, the question is no longer whether some families benefit. The question becomes what happens to the public system that must still take everyone while the state increasingly finances exits from that system. Now, why this matters is Florida is not funding a few exceptions. It is normalizing the movement of public dollars outside the district system on a massive scale. So get ready, right? Because the changes that the funding structure and the policy debate and the practical expectation placed on public schools haven't changed, right? But all the money follows the child. So all that money is leaving to these other schools, but the current public schools still have the same level of bureaucracy attached to them, right? So it's weird because like if we don't uncork the bureaucracy, and like I was in the Army, man, and it's like, I know how to fill out things in triplicate, lots of paperwork. Well, over the last 50 years, since the Department of Education on the federal level was created, and then, acts like No Child Left Behind, et cetera, the amount of bureaucracy on public schools has grown. They can't necessarily uncork any of that. They can't really do the cost savings like a company would do, even though now they're being treated like a company where they have to compete and they have to be competitive. But they can't really liquidate certain levels of expenses without permission from the governments, right? From maybe their local government, maybe the state government, or the federal government. And that's a lot of bureaucracy that the public schools have to fund because we told them that we wanted that. We, the people, said we want all this bureaucracy. We, the people, voted for people that made all these laws and made all these rules. And we have not uncorked all that, yet we're making a parallel track now that doesn't have all those requirements. So, that seems like long-term, I think about No Child Left Behind again, because the idea of No Child Left Behind was pretty good. Like literally it's in the title, No Child Left Behind. That sounds like a good idea. But what it really did in practice was it's made us teach to the test. It made standardized testing and graduation rates like really, really important, like in general, right? So that's not the fault of educators. That's the fault of the legislators. And I'm not saying fault, but that they're the ones that did this, and it didn't quite work out, I think, the way that they wanted No Child Left Behind. They were trying some experiments. They were trying to move the needle. It didn't work. And we didn't uncork all that yet. We haven't uncorked all that to allow public schools to do the same thing now this parallel track in Florida can do. Doesn't seem fair to me. It doesn't even sound logical. All right. Let's go to the next claim. Florida's current voucher system just appeared recently. No, Florida built this over decades. I've heard a couple people say that like, oh, we're going to try this. No, it's been around since 2001. We kind of covered this already. But this does matter because Florida's not a fresh pilot program. It's not a one-year political experiment. They're committed to this. It is a state that has already spent years building the legal, administrative architects, the bureaucracy of a voucher and an ES system. So once you start to build those bureaucracies, as we know, bureaucracies don't die. They just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Well, until they die, right? But they never shrink. And we know bureaucracies don't shrink because look at public schools. We don't shrink them. Look at the federal government. Look at the state government. They always grow. They say we're cutting, but really what they're doing is they're shrinking growth. They're not actually cutting back. So you got to watch the, like Mark Twain said, lies and statistics, right? And so this is funny because what governments will say is we're shrinking government. No, they predicted an 8% increase next year, and they cut that increase to 3%. That is still growth. It's just not growing as fast as the predictive models. And that's how they kind of get us with the marketing and propaganda, all right? So let's go to claim number 3. That these scholarships simply help families pay private school tuition. Well, the reality is that some do, but the system is much broader than that, right? The standard scholarship track supports private school tuition and fees. The Unique Abilities track supports a wider set, as we indicated. And again, the dollars are substantial. Florida in 2025-26 published award schedules showed standard private school scholarships in many counties, $8,000. And this matters because the broader the spending authority, the broader the accountability challenging becomes. More flexibility for family also means more places where tracking, verification, misuse can become a problem. And this is really important because the public schools that are now getting taxpayer monies do not have the same oversights. They do not have the same oversights as public schools. They don't have an elected board. They don't have to publish their budgets, their financing. I mean, they're supposed to submit it not publicly to the agencies that like run the voucher programs, but I don't, I have yet to see how we're going to get access to all that, right? And there's no FOIA requests and sunshine laws like there are in government institutions, right? So it's also been shown, I think this was in New Hampshire and New Orleans, I need to pull these studies back up, but it said that these type of voucher programs don't really get new children in. They just supplement the children that are already going to some extent. And so we're really not taking care of all children, right? We're taking care of the children that can also augment their public school tuition, because we can't assume the tuition for the private school is only $8,000, which is, kind of what the average was been. But it's $14,000. Well, the families got to come up with a difference, the delta on that. So the ones in the most need, the families that are hurting the most, really don't have the same school choice and the same freedoms as those with means. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right. So one claim, I like this claim. Competition will make better schools. They will make public schools better. Ooh-wee boy, man, that would be awesome. That would be great. It would be great if we improved education for all children. It'd be great if homeschools got better and virtual schools got better. We kind of got the 3 to 5 million children nationwide that are in zero school, no school at all. They're not attending school, got them in school. That would be better, right? It'd be great if we improved public schools, and it'd be great if we improved private schools. Wouldn't that be a dream among dreams if everybody got better? That would really help the most number of children. But here's the reality. The argument assumes the competition is actually competition. It's fair. All right? Public schools must take every child. Period. No choice, no arguments, no debate. They also have to keep the same bureaucracy and the same structures. They can't cut expenses the way that a regular company can or a private school can. They can't just shut down a school. People lose their minds. I mean, it takes years of bureaucratic nonsense for them to say, hey, man, we're going to streamline this. We're going to move all these kids into this one school. We're going to have the best teachers of the school, the best resources of this school. People lose their minds, man. A charter school can drop one of their satellite campuses whenever they want to. The public outcry is, where's the public outcry when that happens? People aren't as attached to those schools. So they don't have a history with those schools, right? There's not a community built around those schools, And so the public schools don't get to pick and choose. And know this. The competition is picking and choosing the easiest ones to educate, the easiest ones to try. I mean, it's just logical. It's just common sense, right? I mean, if you're running a company, you can take 100 clients. You can take 100 new clients on this year, 100. Do you want the ones that are the easiest to deal with? Do you want the ones that are the easiest, they pay you on time? They don't hassle. We call it a PITA tax in business. It's PITA. And if you get a client that's really difficult, you have to charge a PITA tax. Pain in the ASS. That's a PITA tax. So if you're a difficult person, and I used to do this when we ran a lot of issue campaigns. If I just knew you were going to be difficult, you just seem difficult. You seem like a pain in the rear. You were demanding, and I kind of wanted to do the work. I needed the work. I needed the money. I'm going to charge you a PITA tax. There's nothing illegal. It's not ethical. I just say, well, I started charging you, $8,000. I'm going to charge you $11,000. Don't do it if you don't want to do it. But you're a PITA, and I'm going to get paid for it. But they can't get paid any more money for tuition. So wouldn't it be better just to take the easy clients, to take the easy students, the ones that are smart, don't have challenges, don't have, psychological issues, don't need a speech counselor. Yeah, you get some additional money for disabled and for disabilities to augment that. That's cool. But, don't you want like really great athletes and people are going to score well so you can then go, look at all the great numbers we have. We got all these scholarships for all of our graduates because we're so awesome. And they have limited seats. Private schools, charter schools, they have limited seats, so they can only take on so much. And you'll never know it, man. You'll never know that they got 100 seats. They submit a list of 1,000. They just kind of skip a few. And I remember this one person goes, well, that's a violation of the law. Well, good for you, man. I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I'm getting old, dude. I've been a lawyer for 30 years, man. And I had this awesome legal professor, and he taught administrative law, and Professor Swartz. And he knew all the Supreme Court justices, man. This guy was just constitutional guru. And I remember we were talking about administrative law, and he goes, so what happens if you violate this? They said, well, it's just an administrative rule. It's just administrative. And he goes, what's the difference between an administrative jail and a regular jail? Nothing. There's no jail is jail. And I guess the point of that little sidetrack is that just because they're not supposed to do something doesn't mean that you can find out that they've done it. It doesn't mean you can do anything about it. All right, so that's the reality of it, okay? Is that, School boards must conduct official business in public meetings open to the public under Florida's sunshine laws. The sunshine law is exactly what it looks like. We get to see everything. It's got to be in sunshine, no backroom deals, guys smoking cigars, making deals. Private schools can do that. Charter schools can do that. Homeschools can do that. They can do this. It's America, and we like to do business with who we want to do business with. Public schools can't do that. And so what happens is the good students leave, and let's assume, I think nationwide, the average per student is like $14,000. So, a student leaves, there goes to $14,000, but maybe that student was a good student. They only took about $9,000 of resources, or $8,000. Like, they didn't need all the extra care and extra support. But now the students left have all these extra needs, and the easier students don't get to augment that. Now, that sounds a little socialist. I get it. And I am not a socialist. I am a capitalist pig, P-I-G. And I mean, but they're children. And the job is to get as many children as possible to adulthood, to become thriving adults and participate in our society, pay taxes, be supportive, pay their own bills. That's the job of education. So let's don't get confused with as an adult, what you want to do for people. They're kids, for Pete's sakes. We have a mission. We either get them educated now, do whatever we can to get them to become a successful adult, or we're going to pay for it the rest of our lives, taxpayers. And make no doubt, remember we talked about bureaucracies earlier. All these bureaucracies we have for adults, some good programs, a lot of fraud, people taking advantage of it. All these social programs that you got out there to try to help people. We're Americans. We're compassionate. We're not going to get rid of those programs. You're not going to get rid of them. You might try to scale them back a little bit, but we're going to try to take care of people. And if you send them to prison, you're absolutely paying for them. If somebody can't operate, they can't function, they can't have a job, and they have to, have to is an interesting word, steal. Maybe they choose to steal. Maybe they have to steal. I can get in that debate with people. I've been poor. I lived in a tent for a while. I did. And I didn't do everything I was a lot proud of, but I get it, and if they go to prison, you're going to be paying for them. Wouldn't it be better to invest in them now so they can become healthy adults? Well, the issue is, for every student's left in public school, left is a terrible word, that every student that gets the opportunity to be trained in public schools has dwindling resources to help those in the most need. And that, from a long-term perspective, we're schmucks. We're not smart at all as Americans. We can't think 20 years down the road. We think to the next election, right? So all these resources are leaving, and we don't know how they're being used, because the voucher program, which is all your money, it's all state money, is going to schools that we can't track. All right, so Florida's own Senate analysis acknowledged that the district enrollment pressures are real. So this isn't just Brian chomping his bit at this. It said, I'm going to read this to you. It says that for 24-25, a third of FEFP calculations, that's 49 out of the 75 districts, had a decline in public enrollment from the prior year, and a total decline of 32,000 students compared to the forecast of most enrollment. So students are absolutely leaving public schools, and it's going to get bigger in Florida now because they've expanded all this. So now every one of those losses is not every one of those losses caused by vouchers. Some of it's demographics, some of it's birth rates, some of it's competition. But once Florida went with broad on private school choice, it had a major new policy issue forcing more and more people in this alternative track, okay? And this really matters because public schools costs, again, do not disappear one child at a time. It'd be interesting if you ran a business, if you're in a company, you could say, well, we lost 5 clients, we're going to have to scale back some of the stuff. If enough students leave, all that revenue goes, but the district has fixed cost by law. By law, because of the bureaucracy. And I know I get upset by this stuff, man, because it's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me that no one looked at both sides of the question. Look, if we're going to do school choice, and we're going to, America's moving that way. You don't get to uncork a monopoly. Once a monopoly has been dissolved, I can't find an example where we had a monopoly, it went away, and then we reformed a monopoly. I mean, I couldn't find any form I couldn't find any example that exists. I mean, I can come up with hundreds of examples. Like, think Ma Bell, right? When I was a kid, we had Ma Bell, one big phone company. I know, kids, you're thinking, one phone company, right? before cell phones, right? There was one, and then it broke down into baby bells, and now we have phone choices all the way, and rates have gone down, and phone carrier services have gotten better. So competition did help, but they all compete on the same rules, right? I mean, all these phone companies compete on the same level of bureaucracy, the same rules. And so the public schools, we haven't uncorked that bureaucracy, those rules against them. And I kind of want to hit this a little bit. So let me talk about some of the big differences between how public schools are regulated and how voucher schools are not regulated. Public schools must enroll all students, no exceptions. Vouchers can select or reject. They have that authority. Could you imagine if public schools did that? Where would these kids go? Where would the children go? But they're going to be a burden on you, taxpayer. Certified teachers. Yes, for public schools. No certified teachers, which means you can get really talented people, but they don't have to be certified. You don't have to pay them as much, and you don't know if they have the same credentials. Not true. Now, state testing. Public schools have to do annual fast state assessment results, which are published. Private schools have this norm testing, and they can do that, or they can do the fast state example. But the issue is the publishing. Not all states require private schools to do this testing, but I'm pretty sure in Florida, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, they have to do a norm. They can do a norm testing, but it's really difficult to find the results, right? Okay. Public schools, full financial transparency. Public record laws applies. Private schools, aggregate financial reporting only, no public records. I don't know what they're doing with your money. And before I found the gospel of public schools, I made a mistake, and I saw it on a charter school board for about 2 years. I was like, oh, cool, school choice, charter schools, I'm down. Man, the budgets. Man, I'll tell you that superintendent guy, he had 2 campuses with, I think we had about 200, there were about 200 kids there. He had the nicest, fanciest office I ever seen. And I'm telling you, his paycheck was more than the superintendent at an 85,000 district campus. I mean, it just seemed, that's when I really started to get a bad taste in my mouth. It just didn't seem right to me. The money should go to educating the babies. And he had really nice artwork, by the way. Really nice artwork. I guess who paid for it? It was a charter school. The taxpayers paid for it. But he sure had nice artwork in his office. This was 25 years ago. And so IDEA compliance must serve every special needs student, public schools. Private schools can limit or decline special education services. Okay. Public schools, annual school grade calculated and published by the state, not really for private schools. Public schools must meet state building and safety codes. That's a lot of regulation. That's a lot of hassle, man. Trust me, man. You get code enforcement people in there. Private schools, facilities, largely less regulated. I mean, they got to get, codes to make sure the buildings, but they don't have the same inspection rules. Public schools cannot charge tuition. It's free to all. Private can charge additional tuition above the voucher. Okay, so once again, I'm trying to just let you know that I'm not making this up, man, but if we had the same equal rules, whichever way you want to go, you could actually compete. And public schools will win because I think they offer a better product. I really do. And I think the data shows that. Maybe I'll get into this later, but there's a lot of studies that show somebody goes off to private school, they come back to public school, and they're behind. They're not ahead, but we feel good. We feel like private's better. It's all emotional. And I'm gonna do another podcast on this next, which is, so be on the lookout for it, that they sell the sizzle, not the steak, because that's what we humans want. I'll get into that. I don't want to digress, but we sell the steak, and humans want the sizzle, man. And they do that even if they're not better. Maybe some of them are. They're good, bad on all types of schools. Bad public, great public. Same with private, homeschool, charters, whatever. I mean, there's good and bad in everything. It's not like a one-celled organism, right? So we just got to be careful that they get to sell the sizzle, but we focus on the steak. And so we got to change that. But I'll have another podcast coming on that one. So next claim number 5. If abuse happens, the system will catch it. And this is about misuse, weak controls, and accountability problems in the Florida system. And Florida's recent audit reporting suggested that the system has already had serious troubles doing it well. So I pulled up a couple news articles for you. Spectrum News reported that the Florida Auditor General found that the state may have made overpayments for roughly 30,000 students. That's an entire school system in a lot of cases. In the private voucher system during 24-25, so this was last year. It had trouble tracking $270 million in voucher funds, and it sent $47 million to families for public school while those children were actually enrolled in public schools. Think $47 million. This is just the state of Florida, kids. $47 million went to the families to pay for a voucher. I don't know what they did with it. I mean, they didn't pay a price. I don't know what they did with it. But the $47 million went to these families, but the kids were being educated by public schools. I would imagine if the kids are on the rolls on the enrollment for the public school did get money for them, but that means the taxpayers paid double. They paid the $47 million for the vouchers, and then they paid let's say the state average of $14,000 for all those students. So the taxpayers are getting screwed, right? So WLRN reported that in 24-25, the Family Empowerment Scholarship report showed overspending, delays in the scholarship payments, funding shortfall. Once again, it's a bureaucracy. So you're just going to have all these issues piling up and a lack of accountability. Other news coverages also highlighted the same thing. Once the program scaled rapidly, the state struggled to verify who was enrolled where, how much money should have moved, and whether the money actually followed the child as possible. So they claim it's not an experiment, but it feels still really experimenty to me, right? So this matters because this is a warning sign for every state considering aggressive school choice expansion. So if your state is doing this, you'd be like, I mean, you can look at the Florida model, but like, look at the Florida model, like dig into it. Like just don't be like, all excited and running at walls. Say, wait a minute, there was a lot of malfeasance. There was some fraud. There was some lack of accountability, lack of transparency. Let's do it the right way if we're going to do it. Like, let's make an equal system that's competitive for all, that helps all children, and make sure the taxpayers' money is not just getting destroyed out there and waste $47 million to families for private schools while their children were actually enrolled in public schools. I mean, we can do better, state A, state B, state C. Let's do better than that. And that's kind of one of the things that I would start to advocate for. So Florida really showed that once the real money starts to moving in at scale, you can imagine, you want to find problems, follow the money, right? And simplicity disappeared. You get enrollment, cross-checking, overpayments, all these issues. So let's just be careful out there. Okay. Number 6, public schools versus private schools. And this is the one that is the most important part, I think, of my analysis, is that what public schools in Florida generally must do with their transparency and testing is one of the biggest unfair advantages. And I had this kind of listed in my notes right now, but I think I hit it pretty well, which is this difference in testing, the non-acceptance, the transparency differences, the disability services difference. And this is just, to me, feels like a core fairness problem. And I don't mean to sound like a hippie. I'm a soldier. I'm no hippie, but right is right. Like, legal is legal, ethical is ethical, and you have two systems, but the competing systems just don't have the same standards. So, so when people say that Florida is giving parents more freedom, I mean, I get that that's the intent and it feels good because we're Americans, and in America we like choice. I like choice. I dig it. But that really is only part of the story, isn't it? Because it's not true of all parents. It's true of some parents. Some parents are going to augment their private school tuition. Others can't. Others need resources. Those resources are being pulled away. So we're going to leave a lot of children behind. So I think that maybe instead of voucher program, we call this Some Children Left Behind Act. I kind of think that's funny. No Child Left Behind Act. Florida is also showing what happens when a state creates a publicly funded exit ramp at scale. So the promise is flexibility, the pitch is empowerment, but the leveled reality is like a lot more complicated. And I think that anyone that you find that just makes it sound, well, people need a choice. People need a choice. Yeah, dude, but let's make it a choice that actually benefits all children, or all of them, so they become productive adults. That's not what's happening. I think that's the dream. That's what we'd like to have happen. But Florida did not just create a voucher program. Florida built a parallel publicly funded education track with completely different rules. And so we're going to keep an eye on this. And I think that one of my big takeaways, if you're here and you're listening, which is, man, I think don't try to say that school choice should go away. It's not going to. People don't want that. Your citizens don't want it. Your families don't want it. And also, like, it's okay. We recruit students back to public school all the time in school choice. Like, you can do it, man. Like, don't think you can't compete. You can. Leveling that playing field, like getting those rules organized and like keep pitching changes to these laws. Don't say get rid of the voucher law and say, let's make it a fair voucher law. And if it's fair, you'll compete and you'll win because public schools are the best. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.